Recording in progress.
I'd like to welcome you to the June 12th meeting of the Lane Transit District Board of Directors meeting. We'll open the meeting with roll call. Susan Cox is excused. Pete Knox. Here. Kelly Sutherland is excused. Lawrence Green. Here. Michelle Weber.
Here.
Heather Murphy. Thank you. Any adjustments to the agenda? Comments from the CEO?
Well, good evening, board. Just a few things. First, we had our bus rodeo this past Sunday. It was a very good event. We have a new champion. It is Mike Funderburk, one of 4 Funderburks that work here. So it was a good event. Staff worked hard, had a good time. We had some guest drivers, including our board president, did a good job, and a lot of staff participated as well. So it was a good time. We talked previously about recruitment and retention and about hiring frontline employees, bus operators, fleet maintenance, and public safety officers. And pleased to report we're doing a really good job in that area. We've had several classes go through since we started that effort. We have 1 class in right now. Our next class has about 22 people in it already, and still interviewing more folks, which means that our HR team, our marketing team, our training team, and our operations team have all modified how we process and train and recruit and source people, which is good. So we're building a lot of muscle memory. We're working with some outside organizations, and our goal is to increase service. That being said, we are slated to, we decreased service recently. We're slated to increase service this fall by almost 8% based off of those efforts and bringing people in. So I'm pleased to report that to you. And finally, I want to thank our federal delegation. They put in a specific projects related to electrification of our ride source services. They suggested those be in the budget. Of course, it has to pass, but we want to thank them for doing that and recognizing the need to deliver service in a responsible way for our environment. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Questions?
Thank you.
Great. The bus rodeo was a lot of fun. On Saturday, I had the opportunity to go through the course with Mike as he was running the course and doing it expertly, and at the same time explaining to me that he had a bunch of relatives who work here and explaining how much he loves this job, working for LTD, and just happy to be in this organization. So that's great that he won.
One more thing. On the admin side, John Allen won, and I'm so happy to report that because he unseated Joe McCormick.
Okay, on to public comment. We don't have anybody signed up in the room. Do we have anybody online?
Folks joining us online, if you'd like to provide public comment, please use the hand raise emoji. Nope.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the consent agenda, there's one item, the appointment of Tiffany Edwards as the vice chair of the Strategic Planning Committee. A motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Moved by Michelle. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Pete. We'll do a roll call. Lawrence? Aye. Michelle?
Yes.
Pete?
Yes.
And I also vote yes. It's approved. Next, we move on to Employee of the Month for the month of June. Cosette?
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and all of our board members. I am pleased tonight to introduce Stephen Scarborough, who is our June 2024 Employee of the Month. Stephen was selected and nominated for this because in April, he took quick action along with a Springfield police officer to save a woman who at Springfield Station while he was on duty was in crisis. She was in the restroom. She was in the process of a medical emergency. She had an adult child there with her who was very upset, and Stephen used his calming demeanor to take charge of the situation and actually save a woman's life. And so that's why Stephen was nominated and selected. But I also want to share with you how great Stephen is as a public safety officer. He's been with LTD since March of 2020, but Stephen was no stranger to LTD because before that he served as a downtown guide. So he knew LTD very well, and we knew Stephen very well. And what I've heard from Stephen's coworkers is that he's loyal, he's very committed, he has a passion for helping people. And they said that sounds so cliche, but it truly does fit how Stephen lives and serves. So it's my pleasure tonight to present to you Stephen Scarborough, your June 2024 Employee of the Month.
Would you like to say a few words?
I'm a man of few words. Thank you very much. I appreciate everything and everybody I work with.
Don't go away, Steve.
Oh,
We have a few
man,
things.
I'm running.
Little help pin.
Oh,
for you to wear.
sweet. Put that on my best.
Good for you.
Cool.
Your letter. Certificate. And the thing I like the best.
All right, I'm getting t-shirts made.
Thank you. You've made the difference certainly in one person's life, and I'm sure many more. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you.
Okay, moving on to the budget approval. Pam? Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Good evening. Well, hopefully this will be the last time that you have to hear me talk about the 24-25 budget. Because we are here tonight to adopt our budget and pass our resolution. This chart, as from the last time, shows a side-by-side comparison of our actual and budget amounts. The budget resolution tonight will both adopt the budget and appropriate an amount to spend for each of our 6 funds. If you would please refer to the budget resolution that's included in your board packets. I want to go over a few amounts that are on here. Okay, on page 2 of the resolution, you'll see the summary totals, and you can see it on the screen up there too. Oh, sorry, Allie. I'm changing my slides, but I'm forgetting to tell you. Okay, you can go to the next one. Okay, thanks. The resolution adopting the budget is focused on the amount being appropriated or approved to spend. On this slide, you have the total amounts from page 2 on the budget resolution. Appropriations generally do not include working capital reserves, which we can see from the previous slide as unappropriated ending balance and reserve for future expenses. Would you go back to the previous slide? It's the amount that has the 70 million under the approved budget column. It's okay. Now you can go back to the summary slide. As I go through each of the fund slides, you'll see that 4 of the fund budgets match the appropriations resolution and 2 do not. Has always been confusing to me, so I thought I would spend a minute tonight explaining why. The differences are the amounts that are being held as reserves. Okay, next slide. This general fund budget includes a line for reserves. In this case, that line represents the required hold for working capital known as the unappropriated ending fund balance. We are required by Oregon budget law to include an ending fund balance in our general fund. The other 2 requirements listed on here, the 71 million and the 8 million, are the amounts that we intend to spend, and they are therefore included on the resolution to be appropriated. So on the front page, under the general fund amount, you can match up those 2 amounts, and what isn't on there is the line called reserves. So, okay, next slide. Under the Specialized Services Fund, you're not required to have a working capital reserve, so the total budget of the total budget on this fund, 14.9 million, is the same amount as what's on the resolution. Okay, next slide. on the Medicaid fund budget, it's also fully appropriated to spend at 17.98 million. And next slide. And the point-to-point fund is also intended to fully spend at 700,000. Okay, next slide. Finally, the capital projects fund is being appropriated for spending at 36.6 million. Okay, then next slide. And finally, the Sustainable Services Fund is the other fund where the appropriation amount does not equal what you see on the budget. Included in the total requirements in this fund is an amount reserved for future expenditure. On here, it just shows total requirements, but if you look at the full budget document, it says reserve for future expenditures. And this amount is not yet appropriated to be spent, so it doesn't show up as in our appropriation resolution. Should there be a time that we anticipate using any of that reserve, then we would appropriate an amount out of this fund to be spent. Okay, and then last slide. So that concludes the proposed budget presentation for the budget resolution. And does anybody have any questions?
Any questions or comments?
Okay, then we're ready to
Are we ready?
have a motion.
We're ready for a motion to adopt the budget.
I move to adopt LTD resolution number 2024-6-12-16, adopting the fiscal year 2024-2025 budget and making appropriations.
Thank you, Michelle. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Pete. We'll do a roll call. Pete?
Aye.
Michelle?
Yes.
Lawrence?
Yes.
And I also vote yes, so that passes. Thanks, Pam. Now on to the long-range financial plan.
Okay, we also have a slide presentation for this. Give Ellie a minute to bring that up. All right. Okay, you can move on to the agenda slide. Oh, perfect. There you go. Okay. This presentation is the third presentation to the board of the proposed long-range financial plan for 2025 through 2034. We're requesting a recommendation and a resolution to adopt this plan. Okay, next slide. This diagram shows the budget schedule incorporating the long-range financial plan and the community investment plan documents. And just as a reminder, the previous schedule was to have a draft, CIP in the fall, then a proposed long-range financial plan and CIP being presented with the proposed annual budget in the spring. This schedule has been changed to provide more visibility and more transparency and more opportunity for the public to make a comment. And we are on that final step now tonight. Okay, next slide, please. Key inputs to the long-range financial plan are current year actual budget and current year budget and the actuals. In the proposed 25 through 34 long-range financial plan, we are using fiscal year 23 actuals, current year 24 budget, and year-to-date actuals, and the proposed fiscal year 25 budget. Those are our key items that we tagged on our to use for our projections. For staffing, current, historical, and projected, we are using the fiscal year 25 budget, staffing levels, and costs as a base. And then we used an increase of 5% per year for 2 years as service levels are planned to increase. And then we leveled out at 4% for the remaining years. For tax revenues, we're using our Oregon Economic Advisory variables. The forecasts are based on historical trends during economic upturns and downturns. The LTD payroll tax rate has been increasing slightly each year since 2016 and will level out at 0.08% in 2025. The rate increases make up a relatively small portion of our expected tax increase. Quoted from the June 2024 Oregon Economic and Revenue Forecast, Oregon's per capita income and average wage are at their highest relative point compared to the nation in decades. A record share of working age Oregonians have a job, and the state's labor force participation rate has risen to the second most across all states. And end quote. So job growth and wage inflation at approximately 3 to 5% are the key drivers of our tax, and that's what I used for the estimate. For operational data, in this draft, we have adjusted the service data and operator staffing to match with the strategic business plan service metrics at the time the budget was completed, and then updated as we've been working on recruiting. The operations data has been analyzed to identify specific costs and revenue relationships. This information is used to project the impact of any service changes. Okay, next slide. For other short and long range plans, the long range, our long range financial plan cannot be done without considering other projects and plans of the district. Although our LRFP is primarily a financial document, we are careful to consider the impact from other planning work in progress, such as the STIF plan amendments and specialized services comprehensive analysis. As plans are updated, those results, if they have a financial impact, are included in our long-range financial plan. For the fiscal year 25 through 34 projection, the remaining ARPA funds were spread out over our next 3 years. And if you recall, we have about 14.9 million left in our ARPA funds. State assistant increases include the STIF support for increases in services and other changes from the STIF amendment. And the other amount is the CIP projects were updated for Tier 1 and Tier 2 projects. In regards to transfers to the other funds, focus of the long-range financial plan is operational and specifically for our general fund resources and requirements. However, the other programs at LTD that the general fund supports are reflected in transfers from the general fund. There's a decrease in our specialized services transfer to reflect the change in our STIF budget budget. That a budget amendment is going to for approval in August, but we are very confident because that I've been talking about that. So are you sure? And we're very confident that our amendment will be adopted. And so we did go ahead and build that into our long-range financial plan. And in summary, in developing our long-range financial plan, we utilized over 30 assumptions based on current economic conditions and 20 years of historical actuals. And even with this extensive analysis, we do have to remember that this is a living document and it will be updated as new information is available. And we will see this again under our new scheduling. We'll start our process again in November. So that's coming up not too far in the future. Okay, next slide. Trend changes between the last time we saw this document and now. Inflation. Although the fiscal year 25 general fund proposed budget showed an increase of 8.6 over the fiscal year 24 budget, it included some catch-up increases. So we projected the trends closer to our actual inflation levels. It also includes an assumption that with our new ERP financial software, we will be able to use continuous budgeting to make quicker cost containment decisions. With our old financial system, it took a while to get information into the system and then get it out of the system in a usable format. And with our new system, it's much easier to do that, and we'll be able to have a quicker access to analytical data. I am looking forward to that. Our health card costs were left at a maximum of 7%. Personnel costs, market adjustments were made in our fiscal year 25 budget. So we used the Oregon Economic Rate predictions for the remainder of the, so we went with 5% for 2 years and then 4% after that. For federal assistance, we're including funding for operations from the formula and the ARPA funds. I mentioned that before. STIF will be accessed for increased service and are the higher costs for increasing that service. And under the CIP, of course, we updated and will continue to update the CIP amounts as those projects come online. Going forward, we will continue to watch the rate of inflation compared with our actual cost data. On our watch list are technology costs and our various equipment replacements that need attention. Negotiations for the public safety officers contractor in process, and the IT negotiations are completed. And we will start, or we don't have to make any changes under the main CBA contract. That contract is ending on June 30th of 2026. So, okay, next slide. All right, so under our operating revenues, our operating revenues are 6% of our total revenues. We're planning on them to increase slightly, while services increasing and then flat. Currently, in our current year, fares and group pass sales are trending above budget. So this is a conservative estimate that we show on here. Advertising revenues plan to begin in 2025 and then ramp up. And yeah, next slide, please. All right, non-operating revenues make up 94% of our total revenue, with payroll taxes being 80% of our total general fund revenue. Payroll taxes are also trending above budget for the current year, and we're using a 5% increase for fiscal years 26 and 27. And that's based on information, again, from the Oregon Economic Commission and their wage growth reports, and then 4% increases for the remainder. For federal assistance, we have 2.2 million of our formula funds that we are planning on using for operations in 25. And then we will actually return back to what we were before our 24-25 years. We had budgeted 4.2 million a year for operations, and then we're going to plan on going back to that. And then I already mentioned that we're spreading the COVID funds out over 3 to 4 years as well. That's our source of last resort, and we'll use it to fill in where we need to, but we can stretch that out longer if we're able to. State assistance from STIF is higher, as you can see, due to the reimbursement from the higher costs for increased service. So, okay. Operating requirements, we've talked about most of this already. Personnel services make up 74% of our total requirements. Materials and services are 23%, and then insurance is about 3%. The long-range financial plan includes an increase in bus operators from the current level of 188, and I just got that number from Jeff today, so we have 188 at this time to 228 in 1 year. Administrative staff levels have just a slight increase. We made large adjustments to materials and services and insurance projections in the fiscal year 25 budget. So we're using an estimated CPI increase here of 3% or a growth rate. That will be, I think that is a doable challenge for us. And I left it at the CPI rate, mostly just because it was a much bigger increase between 24 and 25. I don't know if you remember, but in the budget, there's a pretty big increase in materials and services between 24 budget and 25 budget, it was 18%. So we've made a lot of those adjustments that we needed to be made in specific areas of costs. And so I felt like it was reasonable to use a estimated CPI going forward. The target CPI, according to the Federal Reserve Board, is still 2 to 2.5%. And so assuming that we do make it to that CPI level sometime in the next year or two, I feel like this is an adequate estimate. Oh, all right, next slide. On the transfers, we've updated to reflect the fiscal year 25 budget service levels and current contracts. We are planning negotiations with Pacific Source Trillium and MTM that may impact the amounts needed in the specialized services and Medicaid programs. Hopefully, they will be in our favor. Point-to-point grants are nearing their completion dates, so you can see those, they drop off in the transfers to that program after next year. Sustainable Services Reserve is generating approximately 200,000 in interest revenue annually. So I built that revenue into the additions to the reserve to keep it at 2 months of our general fund operating amount. And then the CIP transfer for match is based on our updated community investment plan document. Okay, next slide. So in total, you can see we're projecting varying levels of surpluses and deficits over our 10 years. It's important to note that our actual spending will still be based on our annual budget as informed by an updated revenue projections and cost indicators. In each year, operating revenues are sufficient to cover our general operating expenses. But in the years that we have a deficit, they're not quite enough to provide the capital match and support for our other programs. Any shortfalls, of course, will be made up with our current working capital. All right, next slide. So speaking of working capital, this plan will leave about 4.6 million in our unrestricted working capital at the end of 2034. This is less than the amount that we had estimated as a balance in our last long-range financial plan. The difference is having a completed fiscal year 25 budget, which has $5 million more in requirements than what was anticipated in our last long-range financial plan. As mentioned previously, the market adjustments in that budget led us to use a CPI-based growth for the long-term financial plan projections. It is also important to remember that our actual working capital isn't just that bottom line amount that's on there. It is a combination of the unappropriated ending fund balance plus the unrestricted working capital. So at the end of this plan, we'll have a total of those two amounts, which is 21.3 million. That's the fiscal year 34. So, okay, next slide. So that concludes my presentation. Does anybody have any questions about the plan?
Any questions? I have one, and it's sort of plan related, budget related, but it's how you manage the budget in this organization. You mentioned the CPI of 3%. Let's say it comes in and you're halfway through the fiscal year and things are running 4 or 5%.
Mm-hmm.
Do you require departments to make adjustments so they stay within the 3%? Or do you say, okay, well, we understand it went to 4%, we'll give you you can spend that 4%, we'll adjust the budget, or is it something in between?
So for the first thing we do is we just look to see how are we doing in certain areas. And if we have to make adjustments between departments, we look at that first. And we identify which the priorities. So for example, something a little bit like that happened this year in our parts department. And they needed what was looking like to be another $700,000. So when when Wendy and I were talking about that, it was like, okay, so where do we go look? So fortunately for this year, we found it in other places. So that's the first place that we look. But but going forward, if we do a mid-year forecast to see where we think we're going to be by the end of the year, if that is looking like that we're going to be short, then yes, we look at spending cuts, but in addition, we look at how is our revenue doing. For example, if our payroll tax revenue is running higher, then we would come to the board with a supplemental budget to say, okay, this is what's going on, this is what happened, this is how we're going to pay for it. So
That sounds great. That's very
Yeah.
active.
yeah, so yes, we very actively review the budget and look at it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to adopt LTD resolution number 2024-6-12-17, adopting the fiscal year 2025-2034 long-range financial plan.
Thank you, Michelle. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Lawrence. That would do a roll call. Lawrence? Yes. Michelle?
Yes.
Pete?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Motion's approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to the community investment plan, Matt.
Thank you, Board President. Board, excited to present again to you. Many of this presentation will be familiar to most of you here. So we will go through really high level to talk about our community investment plan. And at any point, like normal with me, please feel free to raise your hand, ask a question to get that addressed in a moment. Next slide. Our agenda, we'll look at the timeline. You'll see this graphic Pam just presented, so it'll be familiar to you there. We'll talk about the projects and then we'll open it for some, the framework, and then we'll open it up for projects and then questions. So the budget process, you'll see a circle at the bottom right is here we are. Today is June 12th when we're talking about adopting the budget. Thank you, board, for adopting our budget, also the long-range financial plan, and now we're talking about the CIP. As Pam mentioned, the CIP really helps feed into the long-range financial plan so that as we're doing projects and planning that we can do that in a sustainable way and we're not overstretching ourselves. Next slide, please. So what's our framework for projects and the community investment plan is we have project proposals. A lot of times people will come forward with a project to say, here's what we're interested in doing, here's what we're looking, and we want to have a vetting process. So there's a process for vetting for that internally, as well as see if we want to bring those forward. And then with those, as we whittle some of those projects down, we present them for. So what we're going to be showing in the next few slides is that whittled down projects list. As we look at kind of what also gets brought forward, really to help with a long-range financial plan, we're not looking at showing projects that don't have either identified funding, which we considered a tier 2 project, funding that has been secured, a tier 1, or a tier 3 project would be considered, hey, this is an idea, here's what we're looking for and interested in, but we just don't have the funding identified for us to bring that in. So anything that would be a tier 3 project identified in here are those out years to say we don't know how we're going to fund it, and therefore since we don't know or don't have a plan, we're keeping it out there so that no surprises and a way to manage our CIP. Next slide, please. So here's a list, and actually in your board packet you have the list of all these projects as well as the description. So there's some further information for you if you're interested in a project. If you do also have questions about that, I can give a high level overview of that project as well. But really we're breaking these things for the state of good repair, which is looking at our fixed our assets that LTD owns and making sure that we can continue to keep those in working order to continue to provide service. So you'll see just at a high level, facilities has a lot of those projects. 2 of those projects are ongoing consistent projects because we have to do those consistently throughout the whole 10-year cycle. But then you also have some one-offs that are just single time spends to address. I'll highlight a project that we're nearing completion on is a bus wash. Our bus wash, we replaced that here at our main campus from an old bus wash that was original to the build or nearly original to the building, and getting that operational so we can end up washing our buses so they look good when they're out on the road. And so that one's one of those one time, we don't need to we're not needing to do that every single year, thankfully, but we're looking further than in 10 years. Eventually that project will come back because assets don't last forever. Then we have fleet. The fleet is a major cost center here. Obviously vehicles are expensive, so we break those out into three different categories. You have our fixed route, which are our 40 and 60-foot buses that you guys are familiar with out on service. We have our specialized service vehicles. Those are a little less than 30 feet, but we consider those mainly cutaways. Our ride source is when you're out in the community, is a predominantly cutaway vehicles, but it also supports some vans as well. But those are a little bit less expensive. That's why the dollar amount is smaller. And then we have our non-revenue vehicles. So those can be anywhere from a minivan to a sedan vehicle out there. Those are consistently we're replacing. And then we have our tech and infrastructure projects. So a lot of the IT related things, just keeping those in a state of good repair. Next slide, please. This is just a graphic, really kind of showing the year of spend, just to see when are the highs and the lows in that process. And the main one being is the orange, going back to the fleet. So it's taking that data from the previous slide and showing it graphically. There's a big dip I'll just comment on in year 2031. That's really, we've invested a lot. We have 30 new electric vehicles and other vehicles that we're investing in. And so as you're forecasting out when the next replacement is, there's this little lull in year 2031 where there's a drop off. Each year, depending on how assets or vehicles are doing, as well as build schedules, that can change year over year as we learn more and track our things in a really dynamic environment. Next slide. Improvement projects. Here's the list of the projects we have. Improvements really are projects that are an enhancement to what we do. And so these are larger, a lot of times, projects that are one-offs. I'll comment on the first one since it's on the list, but like an alternative fuels infrastructure. For those who've been on the board for a while, we've talked about what is our next propulsion type. LTD can't choose to turn a light switch on to say, hey, we want to go to hydrogen or renewable natural gas propulsion until we actually have a way to fuel those vehicles. So as we're looking at what is the next fuel source for our fleet, we want to make sure that we're looking at, hey, this is the cost for that type of investment outside of those vehicles. And so we're still showing that. If you've been here, it was shown in 2027, but we haven't yet made a decision on what that fuel, as we're tracking the overall cost of ownerships, and therefore it's out there as we're still navigating what that looks like. But there is a cost when we bring a new fuel source, and that's where you're seeing those dollars. We have frequent transit network, the next category, and those are most of you are familiar with our MX service, but we also have the 11 going out to Thurston, and some of those routes, as Jeremy talked about at our last board meeting, where we have a lot of system reviews, and some of those dollars are to support our resources and assets, as well as planning studies. Those are projects that are consistently going to understand how are we supporting the community at large, but that's categorized in frequent transit network. We can go to the next slide. Graphically, just showing those all from an improvements. Again, highlight a peak on this one is in 2029. And as we haven't secured funding or identified the funding, and we're choosing to push those outside of the 3-year, you're naturally going to see a spike. So the two largest projects for memory are the alternative fuel infrastructure projects, which has a large dollar amount in that year, 2029, as well as the ride source expansion. There's a large peak in there, and you'll continue to see that until we really bring that in and find funding for those projects and make decisions on those. Next slide brings all that data together in a summary. I'll just point to the graphic below. You see that line, and that really is to help our eyes differentiate between the state of good repair and the improvement projects. And so what that line is trying to highlight is what's going on there. And last slide for here is really opening it up for questions, but I did change what are the images that we've had on previously, but I just want to highlight the screen behind me is that graphic is our operations control center, command center, as well as dispatch. And that's one of the projects that we're moving forward with. This is a graphic, and we're actually going to be breaking ground here in the near future in summer, which is exciting. This is a project the board has released. The upper right hand photo is a bus. LTD invested in some new MX buses. And so this is one of the ones that actually hit the street recently. Today, I happened to be at 11th and Franklin, and the bus drove right in front of me. It's like, that's our new bus. That's something we invested in, and that's reflected in the CIP plan. And then last month, the bottom right is last month's, you heard Jeremy Card talk about our systems review and some of those planning studies. Those are the things that we're investing in to see what our future will be as far as larger scale planning projects.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Any questions or comments? I'll entertain a motion.
I move to adopt LTD resolution number 2024-6-12-18, adopting the fiscal year 2025-2034 community investment plan.
Thank you, Michelle.
Second.
Seconded by Pete. Do a roll call. Pete?
Aye.
Michelle?
Yes.
Lawrence? Aye. I also vote yes. Motion passes. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Well, today we're going to present on another topic, so how do we jump?
Okay. You are, that's right.
Yeah, it's like Pam twice, me twice, and then you'll have
John twice.
Sorry, turn on the mic. So today I want to talk to the board just about our River Road station. If you remember, late in 2023, Joe McCormick came before the board to talk about some of our excess properties. There was 3 to note: the Hunsacker property, which is north of our Santa Clara Transit Station. We had our Garfield property. There's a little bit of excess there. I think it's 410 Garfield. So we have some excess property there, as well as he brought forward the River Road project. So we're coming back to talk to you specifically about River Road. So next slide. So we'll go over a quick overview, as well as at the very last slide is questions. And I highlighted the proposed board action, but please feel free. This is a really short slide for me. We'll have 5 slides, so we'll be going quick. Next slide, please. So to calibrate and orientate ourselves where we're at, this is just a kind of looking at Eugene Springfield. And you'll see that star in the upper portion. It's just below our Santa Clara station. So that's where we're currently serving out, but that star really helps narrow in what we're talking about. So this station, as you can imagine, is on River Road and River Avenue, which will be highlighted in our next slide. So just a few things. The address, physical address is 11 River Avenue. It's in Eugene, Oregon. The site itself is about just 1.92 acres. And just, it's a little bit hard to see, but you can actually narrow in on where that property line is. It's an image we've taken from our lid to kind of highlight our property line. For fun, just I can outline it. I was hoping it would show better. So you can see it goes here around, kind of here, kind of dives back into there, comes around, and then goes. So the reason we wanted to highlight that is that building right there that is outside of LTD's property, so it kind of wraps around there. This site we started operationalizing it in 1982, so it's been around for a while. And in 2021, when we opened up our Santa Clara station, we started to not serve inside the station. You'll see right on River Avenue, kind of near that building, there's a roof structure that's still a shelter that we operate out of for our fixed route service. So as we're not having to come inside the station, but we do stop right there and then continue on going north. I do want to highlight, as we're looking at our River Road corridor, and how that shelter itself serves the community. It's identified like we don't want to be in that area. We're talking with the city to move that stop kind of further south, just south of River Avenue. What makes that stop or shelter serving it complicated is there's 2 lanes as you're going onto Beltline, which is the North Street essentially that you're seeing that image. And it's hard for operations to turn. You're essentially taking 2 lanes to continue north through that street. And so it really becomes a choke point and a safety concern for operations. So serving that, we're looking and having active discussions to move that south of that intersection. The appraised value, we just received an appraised value at 2.7 million. One of the regulations LTD is under is when we have a property, we need to get the appraised value and then you have somebody review it. So they call it an appraisal and then an appraisal review. When we did have that appraisal review, which we just got last week, they also concurred that the value of 2.7 is what that property is worth. LTD leased this property from Lane County until 2008, in which point LTD purchased it from Lane County and retains ownership, and it is a federally funded project or property. Next slide. Proposed or questions and proposed board action. Feel free to ask me any questions, but on the screen is the proposed board action since there's 2 components to this.
Questions? Pete?
Thanks, Matt. Got a couple questions. One, is it costing us money to keep this on our books?
Pete, that's a failure on my part. I should have told you that earlier, but absolutely it is a cost. So there's multiple cost centers. So we're actively looking at the site, but there's electricity, there's utilities, and there's site things. Kind of ballpark is over 30,000 a year that LTD is paying just to have that site on our books.
And I received a phone call today, and I know everybody else got an email from the River Road community organization saying that they had a couple asks that what could go there, and I don't know that we have any power over what sellers, what we sell to they were asking that but before I really go into that, do we have people who are asking to buy it, or are people knocking on our door to do that?
People have asked. There's a process that LTD has to go through, and so it's a public process to make it transparent. So some of those people realize that it's a vacant property, and like any vacant property, people would reach out to the owner. We have had it. We are not in any talks with anybody interested in that property. And so LTD, one of the things is we'll hire a broker and then use a broker to be the one that solicits and gets feedback. And so that'll be an active proposal that we have to receive brokers to propose on this property. So no, to answer your question very quickly, no, we're not talking to anybody.
Yeah, the River Road Community Organization, they were concerned that it will turn into another fast food restaurant, and their hope was that a more local business might take that since that is zoned for commercial, which in theory could also be housing, but I don't know why anyone would, in their right mind, would put housing right there. It's just that is not very conducive to housing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pete.
Jameson, do you want to add something?
I did. One key point with this particular property is there's federal stake in it. So there's requirements that we have to go through to dispose of it. And I believe one of them is an open solicitation. So we're going to get some clarification around that with FTA and with legal outside this meeting, but just want to put that on the table. We received the communication from the neighborhood association as well, and I can understand what they're looking for. But I believe it's important to also clarify that the difference between this property and the Hunsaker property is that this one has federal stake and the Hunsaker one does not, which gives us more flexibility to handle those kinds of projects that they're interested in. So more to come.
Other questions? Matt, in the past, you've talked about a certain portion of the money goes back to the federal government. Could you refresh my memory on that?
Great question. So each asset's a little bit different. When you're talking about land, whatever FTA or your funding agency has participated in that, then we have to, that money is something that we have to use for a future project. So it's not like we're giving a check to the federal government. We just have to identify a project that meets FTA's requirements. So it still stays with us, but we have to identify a project that meets with us. On this property, we did have, it was an 80-20 split. So 80% federal, 20% local. And so whatever that sells for, LTD has to identify a project to utilize on that.
It's also my understanding that, you know, we would most likely give authorization for the CEO to negotiate a sale, that this item would probably come back to the board for final approval.
Yeah, we can, we don't want to do this in the dark and as public, and so we will come back and have conversations with the board.
Yeah, I hadn't been able to give much thought to the email that Pete's mentioned, but it'd be nice at some point in time to give a little analysis of the pros and cons or the feasibility of anything that's in that, so that we can, you know, give it some appropriate thought. I'm not saying I'm agreeing to anything that's in there, but would like to give it some thought.
Good.
Other questions and comments? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
Okay, before I read the motion, I just have a question for legal. Does the motion as written here cover both of those requested board actions?
It does.
We're good. Okay, just want to make sure. I move to adopt LTD resolution number 2024-6-12-19, authorizing the sale of real property and delegating authority to the chief executive officer.
Thank you, Michelle.
Second.
Second by Pete. Do a roll call. Lawrence? Aye. Michelle?
Yes.
Pete?
Aye.
I also vote yes. Motion passes. Thanks, Matt. Move on to John and authorization. Oops, wait a minute. Authorizing chief executive officer to enter into a contract with South Lane Wheels. John.
Hello, members of the board. Thanks for taking time with us today to go over two contracts before you. We have resolutions for your review authorizing the CEO to enter into agreement with two longstanding services in our area. These agreements are both with local nonprofits, fully funded by grants for longstanding services that have been in our area. To start off with, we're going to be talking about our agreement for services in the South Lane. And to begin with, we have Wendy Frisbee with us to talk us through the procurement process.
So just really briefly, we did a request for proposal on this. We received 2 responses, which was from TAC and South Lane Wheels. And South Lane Wheels was determined to be the most responsible vendor that was so determined to move forward with this recommendation to the board for adoption. And then give it back to John.
Great. So I'm just going to very briefly go through the details of this agreement, as well as have an opportunity for any questions that the board may have. So this is a 1-year agreement with 2 opportunities for extension of 2 years each. The reason for the initial contract term of 1 year is to align us with our grant biennium. So in 12 months' time, we'll be entering into our next 2-year grant cycle. This is a service that is fully funded using both STIF funds as well as 5311 funds, which support services in rural areas or communities under 50,000 people. The services that are within this agreement include our Mobility on Demand, also known as our Cottage Grove Connector service in the area. That's on-demand service using an app that will take anyone within the Cottage Grove city limits, as well as origin-to-demand scheduled services in the South Lane area, going all the way down to the county line. So these are services that we work collaboratively with LCOG to administer. One thing you may recall is that I've been before the board in the past about the transition of grant agreements from City of Cottage Grove at their request over to LTD. So that hard work has already been done. This agreement is for the provision of the services themselves. And so that's an agreement that we're proposing with South Lane Wheels, who's been our longstanding contractor in that area, who was selected as part of this procurement process to be able to operate in the provision of these services. So this is part of a joint procurement process that we underwent with LCOG to identify a shared service provider to be able to provide services, with the agreement that currently LTD would operate within the Cottage Grove city limits. LCOG is administering services that are currently outside of the city limits out down to the county line. The Mobility on Demand service currently operates for $1, 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. Average month would be over 1,000 trips. Our scheduled service starts at $3 and is based on length of trip. That includes Creswell, and that starts from 7:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. weekdays. We own the vehicles and we lease them to the current contractor, the nonprofit South Lane Wheels. I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to go through any questions. Our scheduled service is doing roughly 400 trips a month. These are combined, fairly well utilized services in our area for the portion that we administer within the Cottage Grove city limits. But otherwise, I would say this is an extension of existing services as the community has grown to expect them. What is new is that the contract is going to be offered through Lane Transit rather than the City of Cottage Grove, again, per their request, which has previously been reviewed by the board. So I want to open up to any questions from the board before consideration of a resolution.
Any questions? This one's more of a curiosity thing. I think it's a great program, but do the geographic area of these programs, they don't coincide with the geographic area of the Lane Transit District, correct? Or do they?
That's a great question. So thanks for asking that. Underlying that, I would say, if we're talking about Lane Transit District's payroll tax boundary, no, they do not. So some of the grants that have been transferred from City of Cottage Grove are for a larger geographic area, or the existing services have traditionally or historically gone beyond where LTD collects payroll tax. That's not totally unknown for LTD. So for instance, we have services that we operate in Florence, in Oak Ridge, in which we pursue grant funding so they do not use payroll tax dollars to support those programs. We use grants such as 5311 or statewide transportation improvement funds to wholly fund those services.
Great. I think it's a fantastic program. Other questions? We're ready for a motion.
I move to adopt LTD resolution number 2024-6-12-14, authorizing the chief executive officer to enter into a contract with South Lane Wheels for the purpose of providing specialized transportation services in Cottage Grove.
Thank you, Michelle. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Pete. We do a roll call. Pete?
Aye.
Michelle?
Yes.
Lawrence? Yes. Also vote yes. Motion passes. Next, we'll move on to authorizing the chief executive officer to enter into a contract with Behavioral Health Transportation Assessment and Transit Host Program.
Great, thank you again. So I can go into more detail what that means. So this is a contract with the local nonprofit Whitebird Clinic for provision of those services. Again, to speak to the procurement process, we have Wendy Frisbee with us.
So just briefly, we did do a multiple award contract with this, hoping to get as many participants as we could with this. We ended up only getting one response, which was Whitebird Clinic, but we did find them to be responsive, responsible, and so we do move forward to recommend with that for an award with them. Give it back to Johnny.
Great. So what we're actually accomplishing with this agreement is the provision of services for individuals who are experiencing behavioral health disabilities who may not otherwise be able to ride our fixed route transit system. So these are folks who are receiving care administered through Whitebird Clinic and through other behavioral health providers who needs transportation to be able to receive those services. So we've definitely seen that need throughout our community, and we see that as beneficial for both the individuals receiving care as well as strengthening our public transit fixed route system by making sure that folks who otherwise might have a challenge riding our fixed route system have access to receive that care through more thoughtful means through this behavioral health contract. I did want to note that this is different from Cahoots, which many of you may be familiar with, which is more crisis-based transportation. This is for folks receiving ongoing care who may have received initial intake or support through Whitebird Clinic. So Whitebird has been operating in our community for many years, over 50 years of service as a 501c3. They've been working with Lane Transit District for decades at this point. So this has been a long-standing program intended to meet the needs of people with disabilities that our fixed route system otherwise wouldn't be able to serve. They've partnered with us to provide over 5,000 trips in the past biennium, averages to about 422 trips per month for those unable to ride our buses due to symptoms they may experience due to behavioral health diagnosis. In addition to that work, they also work with us to provide transportation eligibility assessments for our paratransit ride source service. So for folks who, due to the nature of their disability, can't ride the fixed route bus, even if they aren't receiving active care for behavioral health disability, if someone has a disability that impacts their ability to ride public transit, but might still benefit from our ride source paratransit service, they help determine criteria for eligibility for folks to be able to ride. So they partner with us because they have expertise in being able to provide those assessments for the people with those particular diagnoses. So I'm also available for any questions prior to reviewing a resolution.
Any questions or comments? Pete?
Is this part of our obligation that we have to provide transportation for people on Medicaid? Is that part of this, or is this something separate?
That's a great question. So thanks for asking that. This is separate from Medicaid or Oregon Health Plan-based transportation. So we already are providing medical-based trips for individuals who are OHP members or who have coverage under Medicaid. This very specifically will provide transportation for those who both are unable to ride our existing transit systems and do not have Medicaid coverage to seek care for specific behavioral health concerns that they're working on. So it's separate from Medicaid-based transportation, or NEMT as it's also known.
So it's providing new service?
That's correct. So it's service separate from other services that we operate either through the Ride Source call center. It's separate from our NEMT-based transportation.
Okay, thank you.
So this is a service that's probably invisible to the general public, but very important to the clients that are served. Are we unique in providing this service, or do most transit districts do this type of very needed service?
I would say that LTD typically sets a standard for the types of services that we're able to offer for our disability community here. So just based on my own experience, I've heard many stories of people who choose to move to our community because of the types of services and support that we have, both with our local nonprofits and the transportation to be able to bring them there. We regularly hear from other transportation districts who are looking to model based on what we offer here within our community. And so we have a lot to be proud of. I think partnerships with nonprofits allow us to do more than we ever could on our own together. And our long-standing partnership with Whitebird Clinic is a great example of how we do that. So I would say there are other communities that try and emulate. There's probably not many, if any, that do it better.
Fantastic. Jameson?
This is unique. This is unique. This is the program provides so many different services, and if you would compare it to other transit systems, you'd see an outlier, and that would be what we have here, and that's a good thing. We recently had our triennial review. We had FTA come on site and they looked at several different areas around the organization. And one of the highlights that they mentioned, and John is being humble, we love him for that. But one of the highlights that they mentioned was the approach to how we handle this kind of service and the focus that's in there. So I wanted the board to know that.
Great. Other questions or comments? Lawrence?
So just from my understanding, so like the general process, like Whitebird, say, identifies an individual who can't use the standard transportation services, and they contact LTD to send like maybe somewhat like a private type vehicle to come. Okay.
That's a great question. So just to kind of give some context of what this might actually look like on the street. So we work very closely with Whitebird Clinic to be able to identify trips that are better suited to this type of transportation than to say, be in the middle of a busy bus while someone is experiencing symptoms due to their behavioral health disability. Typically, we would use a private taxi that we explore whatever kind of medical transport is necessary to get someone the care that they need. So you may see a taxi going through in town and otherwise think it's an ordinary trip that's otherwise covered under this program.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to adopt LTD resolution number 2024-6-12-15, authorizing the chief executive officer to enter into a contract with Whitebird Clinic for the purpose of providing too many emotions. For the purpose of providing behavioral health transportation services and transportation eligibility assessments.
Thank you for those motions and that. Do I have a second?
Second.
I think Lawrence gets the second. Thank you. And we'll do roll call and we'll start with Lawrence.
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
Pete?
Aye.
I'm also a yes. That motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the board for the consideration.
Okay, moving on. Board member reports. Any board member reports? Pete?
Yeah, last night we had the strategic planning committee meeting right here in this room, and had an excellent presentation on the community outreach framework that staff has been working on, including working with the community outreach ad hoc committee that was formed with many community members being involved, and we passed that along to the board, and so looking forward to the board seeing it and getting that presentation. I think staff really put together quite a good thing there. And then the other thing that came, there was presentation on where the staff is going to be beginning the process of updating what's used to be called the long-range transit plan. Now we're calling it the long-range mobility plan. It's a 20-year plan, looking high level and out in the distance as to how our the system will work and how we're going to provide mobility services. So look forward to all that coming in the future.
Thank you, Pete. Any other board reports? Seeing none. Let's move on to delegated authority report. Any questions regarding that report? Okay, monthly department reports. Any questions regarding that information? Go ahead, Michelle.
So I see a lot of really positive information in this, which is exciting. I just have a question around the high absenteeism and working closely with HR to find workable solutions. I know we've talked about this before, but maybe just a little more color around that.
Yeah. We've been experiencing rather high levels of absenteeism for quite some time, and we're tracking that. Our focus now is really on bringing folks in and analyzing why we have folks on the absenteeism. Of course, that impacts overtime as well, right? So it's a total picture we're trying to drive towards. One of the things we're looking at is what is the absenteeism? Is it first day absenteeism? Is it long-term absentees, people out on different leaves? We're finding out that we have quite a few people out on longer term leaves. So now the question is, why is that? And can we get in front of that with safety messaging or addressing that in various ways? So we'll continue to work on that and report out on that, but we'll bring more specifics with us. It's something that we've been looking at. We do note the question that we have is, can we make service, right? So the issue of making service without canceling any runs in the mornings, that doesn't happen. Sometimes you do have a road supervisor out there running that route, but we are looking at the whys of what's impacting that. We feel we have a couple reasons, but we want to really ferret those out for sure.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any other questions on the monthly reports? Okay. Information on future board meetings is information in your packet. Just to note that we will be taking July off, so no July board meeting. Any actions for future board meetings from anyone? Seeing none. Okay. Thank you all. This meeting's adjourned.
Recording stopped.